Hi, folks. We're going to continue with our recording of the Red Badge of Courage. Last time in chapter 10, Jim Conklin died, and the tattered soldier was left by Henry as he sort of ran away from the scene of death, which is kind of reprehensible. I mean, this guy was dying, and he seemed to have attached himself to Henry and helped him out, and then Henry just ditched him because he saw that he was dying. Um, but again, Henry is a teenager and doesn't really know how to deal with things, but it makes him a complicated character, and that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at as the story continues to unfold. Sorry, I'm in the car and it's cold out. My son's in a swim meet, so it is what it is. It's early morning too, but Henry's a complicated character. He's not like the characters of so many stories that predate this, in which they're not ambiguous. They're just purely good or purely heroic. Henry is neither of these things. He's cowardly run away from combat. He's done everything he can to justify his actions to himself. He fell in with a group of wounded, and now he's watched his friend, who was brave and courageous, Jim, die, and he's abandoned this other tattered man to die alone, and he's running from another situation here. So he ran from battle, and now he's running sort of from facing death. I think that's interesting. So I'm just going to start reading, and we'll continue with our analysis, looking at some of the things that we've been looking at throughout the entire story. But now we're starting to get to the point where we can start to assess whether Henry is a dynamic character, whether he's going through any changes. Is this a traditional coming-of-age novel? We're going to start seeing more of our themes. We looked at sort of the symbol of the red badge of courage being an injury or a wound. All of these wounded had a red badge, a bleeding hole in their flesh that was a result of their courage, or so Henry thinks. And that's the title. So clearly we're getting to some of those kinds of things as well. Anyway, let's pick up where we left off. Chapter 11. He climbed a little hill. He saw that the road was now a crying mass of wagons, horses, and men. Fear was pushing it all along. It's interesting that fear is the motivation for all of these people. The youth felt a bit comforted by the sight, as he should. He was cowardly as well, right? They were all moving back. Perhaps then he was not so bad after all. He seated himself and watched the terror-filled wagons. They were running away like soft, heavy animals. Soon, a forward-going column of marching soldiers appeared in the road. It came quickly. The command to get out of the way had a sound of great importance in them. The men were going forward to the heart of the noise. They were to meet the eager rush of the enemy. They felt the pride of their onward movement when the rest of the army was trying to escape down this road. They pushed aside wagons with an attitude that nothing mattered as long as their column got to the battle in time. This importance made their faces serious, and the backs of the officers were very straight. As the youth looked at them, the black weight of his worry returned to him. He felt that he was regarding a line of finer beings. The separation between himself and them was as great to him as if they had marched with guns of flame and flags of sunlight. He could never be like them. He wanted to cry because he wanted so much to become better than he was. So, he's gone through these things, but he's returned to being introspective. We talked a little bit about the differentiation between acting in the moment, which Crane characterizes as sort of animalistic, and then sort of the civilized self-reflection. And Henry's really big on analyzing himself. I will point out, and I'm sure you've noticed it at this point, that he waffles back and forth a whole lot and never comes to any real conclusions. But again, Crane is trying to capture the idea of a teenager at war. And maybe he does that fairly well. It's interesting, though, that they're characterized sort of like angels, as they march off to combat. Also, varied ills had begun to cry out. In their presence, he could not continue his desire to fly high on the wings of war. They made it almost impossible for him to imagine himself as a hero. He fell. He discovered that he had an awful need for water. His face was so dry and dirty that he thought he could feel his skin break open. Each bone of his body hurt and seemed to threaten to break with every movement. His feet were like two sores. Also, his body was calling for food. It was more powerful than direct hunger. There was a dull, weight-like feeling in his stomach, and when he tried to walk, his head seemed to swim. He could not see well. Small spots of green floated before his eyes. So clearly he's exhausted, but he's also starving, and he hasn't had enough water, so he's dehydrated. All of these things are sort of happening to him. You know, one of the things you don't think about in the moment when you flee is that the army is your source of provisions, and he has cut himself off from that source. While he had been experiencing many emotions, he had not been aware of his hurts. Now he was at last compelled to give attention to them, and this self-hate was increased. In despair, he decided that he was not like those others. He now admitted that it was impossible for him to ever become a hero. He was a fool. Those pictures of glory were pitiful things. He murmured from his heart and moved away. A certain desire within him kept him in the area of the battle. He wanted to see and to get news. He wished to know who was winning. Again, he thought that he wished he were dead. Thinking of the dead, he made himself feel very angry at some of the dead men, as if they were guilty for thus becoming lifeless. They might have been killed by lucky chances, he said, before they had had opportunities to run away, or before they had been really tested. That's a lucky chance? I mean, hear what he's thinking here. Somehow it would have been lucky to get killed before he could run away. That's not really clear thinking. I lost my spot. Or before they had been really tested. But they would be praised for bravery. He cried out bitterly that they had stolen their crowns, and their robes of glory were false. There is something in that, though, like how many dead people that get treated like heroes, you know, after a battle really were heroic in their actions. We lump them all together. However, he still said that it was a great pity he was not as they were. When he thought again that it was not possible for the army to be defeated, he tried to think of a fine tale which he could take back to his regiment. With it, he could avoid the anger he expected to receive, so he's trying to come up with a lie for why he ran away and what he was doing. But it became impossible for him to invent a tale he felt he could trust. He thought of many, but put them out of his mind one by one as no good. He was quick to see the weak places in them all. Also, he was much afraid that some unkind remark might strike him mentally low before he could tell his protecting tale. He imagined the whole regiment saying, "Where's Henry Fleming? He ran, didn't he? That's awful." He thought of several persons who would be quite sure to give him no peace about it. They would doubtless question him and laugh at his slow hesitation. In the next battle, they would watch him to see when he would run. Wherever he would go, angry and cruel stares would follow him. As he imagined himself passing near a crowd of companions, someone would say, "There he goes." Then, as if the heads were moved by one muscle, all the faces would turn toward him with wide, knowing smiles. He seemed to hear someone make a joke in a low voice. At it, all the others would laugh and laugh. So one of the characteristics of Henry that I think is really present in this particular section is that Henry, he clearly thinks of himself as the protagonist of his own life, right? Like he's got, or of the world. He thinks everybody's focused on him and everybody's paying attention to him and everybody's wondering about him and everybody's going to ridicule him. It's all about him all the time. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, if there's something about Henry that makes him annoying or frustrating, I think that's it. The reality is, how many people in the regiment are probably thinking about him? Maybe a couple have spared him a passing thought, wondering where he is or if he died. But I doubt that anybody is preoccupied with him while they're fighting a battle, except for himself, of course. So anyway, he is self-conscious. He's worried about his reputation. He's worried about how he's going to be treated by other people. And that brings us to the end of chapter 11. So I will stop this video and start a new one.